Originally, okay, so I had a misunderstanding. Originally, I thought the song was He's Alive, like, the one by Fernando. And so that was the name, I named my thing for it. So I got a little bit of a misunderstanding there, so bear with me. I was reading an article yesterday. It was by CNN, and they were talking about that Christianity may not be as dead as what they thought. And I thought that was kind of interesting. So, with a title like that, it kind of pulls you in. I'm reading through it, and he's talking about some things that Christianity has learned to embrace. And they said, one of the big things that's happened is denominational borders have gone down. And I said, well, I knew that. But then they said that a lot of people are migrating into the U.S., and they're Christians, and they're bringing that love for Christ with them from the other places, from Africa and from South America and all that, and they're bringing that love of Christ back in. And so it's revitalizing some of the churches, because, down there, their churches are doing fine. It's only Americans that are kind of struggling. And I thought, man, that's so interesting that we're seeing all this deal. But, I think the amazing part about this is it's about renewal. That's it. That's the entire theme of this day, is renewal. So, you might think of it as what's been in the past, we can let die with Christ in the grave. But if we want to do something good for the future, this is a great time to start something, to start a new devotion to Christ. Because this whole day is about the renewal. It's about power over the past. It's about power in going forward. So that's one thing that we sometimes forget to set up those milestones that says from this point on, I want to be different. And you can do that today. You can say here on Resurrection Sunday that I want to be different tomorrow. I want to follow Christ more closely. I want to know Him in a better way. Because what we found out, and what this whole thing has been about, is Jesus was fighting religion back in His day. The Jewish people had gotten so far away from serving God that Jesus had to bring them back to showing what God looked like. He had to remind them about the weightier matters of justice and looking out for those that can't help themselves. They had gotten so far off from this. They'd gotten into making sure that you had tithed just enough. They had gotten to where they were they were kind of looking over your shoulder, kind of like the picture of the tax guy, always looking over your shoulder to see how much more can he give. But that was the church back then. So Jesus brought a renewal. And Resurrection Sunday is about the punctuation. If the rest of His life was a sentence, Resurrection Sunday is the exclamation point at the end. It's how He punctuated that He was who He said He was. So we're going to pick up the story here in Matthew 28. It says, early on Sunday morning, as the new day was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went out to visit the tomb. Suddenly, we all like those suddenlies in the Bible, there was a great earthquake. For an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, rolled aside the stone, and sat on it. Why is that verse significant? Because here's the thing. Religion was guarding this tomb. They had guards sitting outside this. Religion was guarding the tomb. The government had put a seal on the tomb declaring that if any man opens this, he is now against Caesar. So politics, government, and religion all said that man was staying inside the tomb. So what did the angel do? He broke the seals, he rolled the tomb, and he sat down on it to say, it ain't moving again. Jesus is coming out. Think about that. Just stop and think about that for just a second. Jesus is coming out. Whatever problem you have today, Jesus is coming out. If you will let Him, He'll come out. And He'll change the situation around. Let's move a little further in this. His face shone like lightning, and his clothes was as white as snow. The guards shook with fear when they saw him, and they fell into a dead faint. And then the angel spoke to the women. "Don't be afraid," he said. "I know you are looking for Jesus, who is crucified. He came out." The angel's up there, and the guards didn't want any part of this. The guards didn't want any part of what was going on here. They had realized what it is to fall into the hands of a holy God. They knew not to mess with that angel that's sitting up on top of this rock. And the angel says, Jesus has already come out. He's already come out. He was out of here before you even came here. But he let the woman know that this has already happened. Then the angel went on to say, he isn't here. He is risen from the dead, just as he said would happen. Come, see where his body was lying. And now, go quickly and tell the disciples that he's risen from the dead, and he's going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there. Remember what I told you. In case they didn't know, those linen cloths that we talked about in the earlier service, they're laying on the rocks. Earthly constraints aren't holding him anymore. He's gone out. He's left them lying on the rocks. Jesus is alive. And the women ran quickly from the tomb. They were very frightened, but also filled with great joy. And they rushed to give the disciples the angel's message. And as they went, Jesus met them and greeted them. And they ran to him, grasped his feet, and worshipped him. And Jesus said to them, "Don't be afraid. Go tell my brothers to leave for Galilee, and they will see me there." I like to think of Jesus meeting them as he just couldn't wait. He just couldn't wait to tell them, for them to see him. So that this thing that they, they're probably questioning. It's early in the morning. You know how you are this morning when you were up there on the hill? And it's like, you're all kind of like, "Hey, Pastor John, you okay? You're still half asleep." Maybe that's what they were thinking. Maybe they're like, maybe that was all delusion. I don't know. This may have been an illusion. But then Jesus is standing right there on the ways they go. And they went to him. And they held his feet, it says. And he says, "Go tell my disciples, come meet me. Come meet me over in Galilee." In the other versions of this, the women come back to where all the disciples are hanging out. And they tell them. And none of them believe them. But Peter and John are going to go investigate. So they ran to the tomb. Peter and John, they take off. And they go get inside the tomb, and they see the same thing that the women saw. That there's grave clothes laying over where his body was resting. And he's gone. He's gone. And they sit there and think, well, maybe this is true. They just don't know. And they go back. So they get back and they tell this. And a couple of the disciples, they're going to go up the, go to my next slide, please. A couple of the disciples, they're going to go back to their home. They're going to get out of town and kind of contemplate all this. They didn't know about all this. So they're heading back to their home for the evening. And they're heading up the road. And they're talking about all that's going on. They're going back and forth, back and forth. Man, do you believe this? I don't know, man. He came back from the dead. But then what did the women see? They're kind of going back and forth. And this dude walks up to them. And he starts talking with them. And they're like, "What?" And he asks, "What's been going on?" And he said, "Oh, you must be living in a cave, man." And that was a joke. You should have got that. Because it came from a cave. So he said, Jesus. He's this guy that's went around doing all this great stuff. And then they killed him. They crucified him on a cross and put him in the grave. But then we had some women say that he was back. He was here. And I just don't know what to believe. And Jesus kind of, the Bible records, he kind of went, yeah. And he said, well, you know what? I know these verses back here. And it said he went through the verses, all the verses that pointed to him back in what we would call the Old Testament. And he went through each of them, pointing out where the Messiah was. And they're just dumbfounded as they listen to him. Because, I'm sure this little thought crossed their mind. We've been with Jesus, and we know him. And now you're telling us all these verses and showing us where we missed it. And it said they were just listening, fascinated to what these two disciples are saying as they're walking along. And they get to their house and they invite him in for supper. And right before they sit down to eat, the man, poof, disappears. And they realize this was Jesus. We've been talking to Jesus for the past hour as they were walking. They were talking to Jesus. And they go, didn't our hearts burn inside when he talked to us? Because his words had so much truth. See, he was right here. We saw him. And so they ran back as fast as they could. And they meet the disciples up in their room. And they start telling them about it. So now the disciples are thinking, well, now we have the one, now we got another telling us about this thing. And all of a sudden, Jesus is in their midst, it says. He walks in. And they were like, is he a ghost? And it says they watched him eat fish to see if the fish actually, it went into his body or if it just kind of fell out on the ground. Like, you see in those ghost movies? They were watching him. They wanted to know, is this man real? They didn't want to get too close to that. Then it says they sat again, and Thomas, who didn't believe for the first time, he's with them. And there's Jesus. And just like Trey was talking to us, he said that Thomas asked to be able to see the things, the places where Jesus had his wounds. And Jesus showed them all the wounds. Like a little kid. Kids, they like to investigate something when you tell them. They like to look at things. They want to see it in person. It's hard to think abstractly when you've not seen things before. And so Thomas needed to see that. He needed to be able to put his hands through the holes in his hand. He needed to feel that place in the side where he watched that spear slide up into his heart. He wanted to be able to see those things before he believed. And just like Thomas said, after he immediately fell down on his feet when he found the stopping places, and Jesus told him, blessed are those who haven't seen and believe. Lastly, about 7 of them went out to fish. And they're out there, and they're going back to what they know. You remember when we originally talked to some, about 4 or 5 of these guys were fishermen. And they went back to what they know. Because they're still trying to process this. How many like to go do something that's comfortable to you when you need to process? Does anybody? I like to mow. That helps me to process. Or when I go to a movie and I sit there and I think about things in the movie theater because I feel comfortable and safe. And so that's what they were doing. They went out there to fish. And lo and behold, they didn't catch anything. They fished all night and they didn't catch anything. Now these were professional fishermen, folks. This wasn't me or you going out there. These are professional fishermen. And they realized, man, maybe we got out of this fishing thing right on time because we didn't do too hot last night. And all of a sudden, this figure over by the shore, he says, hey, throw those nets over to the other side. And they're like, what? All right, crazy. And so they threw the nets over the other side. And they couldn't even drag the fish in, it said. They just changed sides of the boat. They didn't change legs. They didn't do anything else but just change sides of the boat. And Peter immediately knew it was him. And he jumps out of the boat and starts making for land. And they paddled the boat up there. And Jesus already's got fish waiting for him. And it says they eat a meal there by the lakeside there in the Sea of Galilee. And then it says they left. They left and they went up to the Mount of Bethany, up in Bethany. And we get ready to pick up the story right there. As they watch him, he tells them one last thing, and then he ascends up into heaven. They watch him leave. And there's one last thing that he leaves them with. And the one last thing that I'm going to leave you all with is a verse that's very familiar to us all. Jesus sums up his mission with this statement. He says, therefore, go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I've given you. And be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. He said, guys, you've been with me for 3 years. This is it. He said, so now you need to go out. But here's the rub. I'm not going to be with you anymore. Okay? And he said, so what are you? So then he tells them what they're going to do. They're going to go, as they're going, as that verse would read, as we would understand it, as you're going, I want you to make disciples in all the nations of the earth, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And then he said, I want you to teach them everything I've taught you. He says, but don't worry. I am with you, even to when it's all over. Great work. I'm going to be with you, even till this thing's all over. He said, wherever you go, I'm there. You're taking me out to the places that you're going. What a promise. And he says that same thing to us here today. If you'd rise with me. We're going to sing one last song, and then I'm going to come up and we'll dismiss it.